Welcome back to the Midnight Mirage School of Higher Learning, ladies and gentlemen. Very, very grateful to have you tuned into another classic. Hopefully you gained something and learned from this tape, all right? And it serves as some type of enlightenment to your never-ending journey of the truth, because the truth actually is something that resides with the Creator, and it is unveiled slowly. And the reason why it's unveiled slowly is to keep us inspired and motivated and to keep us on the journey. That's why it's not just given all at one time. And it gives you something to do every day. You know, other than that, why are you here on earth? It's not like you're trying to just die tomorrow. It ain't like you're trying to die in 2 months. So don't look at it like you want to hurry up and get to the truth and hurry up and get to the answer of why everything is what it is. All right. It is it's a spiritual journey. All right. And that'll serve as the prelude to this tape. So what I want to do, and this will be a special treat for all the lovely ladies in the Midnight Mirage, because we will learn about a American historical figure. They always tell us about Rosa Parks. They tell us about Coretta Scott King and Sojourner Truth. But we're going to learn about another American empress who was a warrior. And she actually was someone who wanted to fight for her people. And she doesn't get any shine. And this would be Anacaona, the Empress of Xaragua. All right. Anacaona, the Empress of Xaragua. And that's her on the screen right here. And as you can see, this is an indigenous copper-colored melanated woman of the Americas who was from the region today that we call Dominican Republic, so-called Haiti, the islands that the Spanish Crusaders first encountered when they came from the Horn of Africa into the Americas, okay? So this was a so-called black woman, and we're going to know it's a so-called black woman from some of the information we're going to read later on. So I had a brother in the comment section. He had a question, and I just want to answer it real quick. But basically, you know, he wanted to know a little bit more about the cultural and maybe ethnic background on some of the people in the what we call islands, the so-called Caribbean islands. And briefly, I'll, answer this man's question, because this will help us also see who did the Spanish Crusaders find in the Americas during the late 1400s, early 1500s. OK, now, in order to answer this question, we can't just go off how somebody looks, because people in the islands, they have a variety of shades, and they all are, they look like Negroid people. And even when they come to the Americas, they can blend in with mainland North American people, Mississippians, people of Mississippian descent. They can blend in right with us. Some of the brothers and sisters listening to this, that's probably from places like maybe in the Northeast, maybe New Jersey, and New York, where you all live around people from Trinidad, and some of the other islands. They look like regular so-called black people, but culturally they're different. Some of their last names are different. Let me say that one more time. But culturally they are different. And some of their last names ethnically show what lineages they come from. So although they may be melanated, but they may not be of Shemitic stock, some of them are of Canaanite stock. Now, somebody may say, well, Blackbeard, where do you get that from? I want to turn your attention into something that's called the Carnival, or the Juvert, which is a festival, or it's almost like a party gathering that they have in the Caribbean islands. And I became made privy of this because in the city of Atlanta, on certain Saturdays, I could remember when I would be going out doing my thing, and on certain main roads, I would see a lot of women walking down the street in these, flowery costumes. They look like bikinis. I would see men, some of them, painted. They would have literally black paint on them, and they would have horns on their head. All right. And they would be sticking their tongue out. So I would see this combination of this flowery looking sex goddess and a horned man, or a horned figure. All right. Now, when I started to look into the Juvert, or the Carnival, basically it took me back to an ancient Babylonian festival known as the Zugmek, Zugmek, the Zugmek. In Babylon, it's called the Zugmek. In Rome, it's called the Bacchanalia. In Greece, it's known as the parties of Dionysus. OK. the modern day so-called black fraternities and sororities in college, where they have like that party lifestyle, the orgies, getting drunk and that type of thing, that goes back to those ancient festivals. Also, it's called Saturnalia as well in Rome. But this is something that goes back to the ancient Canaanite god Baal and the ancient Canaanite goddess Ashtaroth. So when you see the melanated people that are from the Caribbean islands during the Juver or the Carnival, and you see the women out there and they be looking real good, I ain't gonna sit here in front, but when you see them, they dressed in the sexual attire, they looking real good, they got the makeup on, etc. What they are is acting out as the archetype of the sex goddess, Ashtaroth, all right? And when you see the men out there and they have the horn head, they got the horns on their head. Not all of the men have horns on their head. Some of the guys just walking down the street with regular clothes on. But you will see some of the guys out there and they'll be dressed up looking like these demon figures. They actually are acting as the male archetype god Baal, Baal. And Baal and Ashtaroth are Canaanite deities. So you have to understand that also too in North America, those of us that are from the South, from Alabama, from Louisiana, what we call Mardi Gras, which goes back to the Festival of Fools in medieval Europa, all right, which is, it's still part of all of the ancestors. Remember how I talked about the Moorish Franks and how the Moorish Franks and the various Frankish monks, when they came into the Americas and they came into the South, they brought certain customs from medieval Europe here. And the Feast of Festivals is one of them. For all of us that have ever seen the Disney cartoon movie known as The Hunchback of Notre Dame, there was a part where they showed you the Feast of Festivals and they had the Hunchback of Notre Dame basically as the royal jester or in the role as the king. And also think about how the king must die, because in the ancient world, the king was also correlated with the sun god. And they believed that the fertility and the just evolution of the society, it was dependent on the sun god revitalizing himself. So once the king started to get of age, they started to, want to make sure, does he have an heir? And they also want to recycle his energy into the next heir. So the king would either be killed or sacrificed, or he would have something symbolically killed or sacrificed as a symbol of this ceremonial ritual, which all goes back to, the ceremony or the ritual of Osiris being killed by Seth, okay? The ancient Hamitic mythology, all right? So understand that the Canaanites Canaan being one of the sons of Ham, they had that same religion. And I want you to think about when the Shemitic Israelites, when they left from Egypt, they went into the promised land, aka Canaan. And the reason why it was called Canaan is because some of the Canaanites were living in an area that was not theirs ancestrally. So that's why the Israelites had to clean them up and get them up out of there. But, from that time period, and also from the time where the king of Sidon and Tyre, King Hiram, where he was in allegiance with King Solomon, and they worked together to build a temple, and they went on various sea voyages because they had a navy together. This is also where you see Shemitic Israelites grouping together with Canaanites during the time of Carthage, where they talk about the Carthaginians, or what they call the quote unquote Phoenicians. This is actually an allegiance between Shemitic Israelites and Canaanite Phoenicians or Canaanite Sidonians. When they talk about even the Vikings, like how we have the Minnesota Vikings, the Vikings actually were a copper-colored melanated people of Negroid stock that were a mixture of probably a little bit of Canaanite and Shemitic Israelite. So this may be some of the background ethnicity to the people that are in the Caribbean islands. Some of them may be Shemitic Israelite descent. Some of them may be of Canaanite Phoenician descent, and some of them may be of an admixture. And then you may have some that are 100% Hamitic, because you had, during the time where the Spanish Crusaders got to the Americas, although they were a melanated people and they were amalgamated, but they weren't privy to some of the, we'll say, maps that the ancient Canaanites had. And a lot of these ancient Canaanites, they were enemies of Rome. So they didn't want their information going down to Romans. All right. So these later day Roman Catholics, they needed to get, privy to this information. So they would have to find certain, Moorish Israelites or certain Islamic Muslims that would work with them, that would give them these maps that may have had, allegiances with certain Canaanites, because the Canaanites weren't fucking with the Romans at all. So this is how, quote unquote, Christopher Columbus, who more than likely was an amalgamated Catholic or Jew, probably, or Israelite rather. This is how they knew about, coming into West Africa and then later on the Americas. Okay. So I just want to get that prelude, and hopefully that answered the brother's questions. But yeah, to know more about the cultural background of some of the people in the Central Islands, look up that what they call that Juvert and Carnival. All right, that festival party thing that they have. Because you got to remember, mainland North American people, like regular people like me, that's from Georgia, Alabama, Illinois. Not saying that we don't like parties and go to parties, but that's not something that's real big in our culture like that. And I guarantee, and if I had some of the brothers that's from Louisiana right now, in particular that may be from New Orleans, that's listening to this tape, maybe they can come in on this. I'm not saying that in the so-called black community, in the Mississippian communities of Louisiana, New Orleans, that when it's Mardi Gras time, that they not on Bourbon Street, engaging in the partying as well. I'm sure they are. And I'm pretty sure also that in the different wards and projects and neighborhoods and suburbs and communities of New Orleans where the Mississippians live during Mardi Gras time, they may even have a little bit of partying going on there. But predominantly, it's not a mainland North American thing. That Juvert Carnival Festival, that's not something we do like that, because the Shemitic Israelites primarily, they didn't engage in that. They didn't engage in that bacchanalia and that type of stuff. A few of us did when we started to go into these Canaanite civilizations, because the Canaanites, these people were extremely advanced. These people were extremely advanced. A lot of Israelites learned certain things from Canaanites about business, finance, like etc. So I'm not saying that Canaanites are just these evil people, but they did have, a pagan culture and pagan religion, So so the Canaanite religion and society is highly influenced in what we know of as the Grecian culture and the Roman culture. Okay. And those pagan elements of the Roman culture come from Canaan. All right. So that's how it shows up in the Carnival and Juvert. So the next thing I'm going to do is read in a book I have called Revealing America's Dark-Skinned Past, Volume 2, The Columbian Era, published by Red Silver Fox Thunderbird. Revealing America's Dark-Skinned Past, Volume 2, The Columbian Era, Red Silver Fox Thunderbird. All right. And we'll read and learn more about Empress Anacaona. After the arrival of the second voyage and discovering the destruction of La Navidad, Columbus went about founding a new location for his colony so he could continue his quest for gold. Following the establishment of the new settlement called Isabella, the Spaniards went about their mission of finding gold, often leaving the farms they were cultivating unattended, because the men knew nothing of farming and they did not accompany this trip to do manual labor. Combine the fact that the colonists could not find the gold in the large quantities they were expecting, along with the labor that was expecting of them, and you have a recipe for turmoil. These outcomes led to the beginning of an oppressive treatment of the indigenous inhabitants of the islands, a policy that was continued onto the U.S. mainland and did not end for centuries. So as you can see right here, when these Europeans came here, these niggas was starving. They didn't have no money. They didn't have no gold. They made all these backdoor deals and promises to the Pope and to the king and queen of Spain and Portugal. So they had to figure out how to make all this come together, and they were starving. So that's what led to a lot of the brutality and them being very, very aggressive and forcing the people to give them resources and enslaving people, etc. All right. So it says that Columbus's main settlement in present day Haiti and the Dominican Republic. So what we call today Haiti and the Dominican Republic is what so-called Columbus and the Spaniards was called in Hispaniola. And some of the cities of Hispaniola were Isabella in 1493, Santo Domingo in 1498, La Navidad in 1492. La Navidad was the first one. And of course, that one was destroyed. So that term Hispaniola is not an indigenous American island term. OK, that was actually put upon those people by the foreign Spaniards. All right, here, let's continue. Guarionex, the principal chief of Magua, which is the part of the island surrounding Isabella, who up until this time had been faithful to Columbus, tried to convince him to modify his order because he insisted they did not know how to collect the gold, and the amounts that he was requesting would be impossible for them to collect. So this chief of the island that the Spaniards call Hispaniola, his name was Guarionex. And it looks like the indigenous people may have called it Magua, Magua. So I'm going to call modern day what they call Hispaniola, Santo Domingo, Magua. That's the indigenous name, more than likely. Or maybe some of you all can research and get some further information on that. Magua. Initially, Columbus refused the humble demands of the chief, but he soon realized that the request amount of gold could not be found. As time passed on, it was found that personal service was the only form of tax that could readily be enforced. And accordingly, more and more of the natives were driven into working the farms of the Spanish settlements. So as you can see, that Columbus is starting to see in these Spaniards that getting the resources are going to be hard, but actually forcing the indigenous people to work, this could be easier, accomplished. The native inhabitants were not content with the work being forced upon them and began to flee the mountains to avoid the deplorable existence. The native people even tried to an attempt to force their unwanted visitors out of the islands. When they noticed how dependent the Spanish were on the provisions they produced, they destroyed crops and left the farms in waste and retreated further inland into the mountains where they could hide and survive on the roots and herbs there. They voluntarily endured hardships rather than submit to the treatment inflicted on them by the conquistadors. The plan was successful for only a short time because the Spaniards still had their resources from home, but also because the islanders had to leave their own farms unattended. It was not long before the native people were suffering themselves. So what was happening is that when indigenous American people started to see how down bad these Spaniards were, how these Spaniards were really relying on them for everything, they said, look, we'd rather just abandon our own farms, destroy our own crops, go inland, retreat to the mountains, duck off. And at the very worst, we'd rather starve and die than to become goyim for you. All right. The plan also angered the Spaniards, who were now advancing into the mountains from town to town to pursue their fleeing workers. And they accompanied with this an unrelenting fury. Villages were burned to ashes. The feeble were mercilessly massacred. Shrieking victims were slashed down by the sabers of the Spaniards. They ripped open the bellies of pregnant women, took out the tiny infants, and cut them into pieces. Children were taken by their feet, and their heads were dashed against rocks. Hands were half cut off and lay dangling by flaps of skin. Ferocious dogs pursued the helpless victims and devoured those they caught. Others were hung and still others were burned alive. The Spaniards wanted to display their dominance, inspire terror amongst the islanders, and frighten the entire island into submission. So you got to understand this too. See, obviously, King, Christopher Columbus, the people that were with him, they already had intentions on being on the bullshit when they got here. So that's when I was saying yesterday that not all Spanish Catholics, and let's say people coming from the Iberian Peninsula, all of them were not acting like this. But you had different groups of them and different pockets of them that were on this. And unfortunately, their leadership, which was the crown, they were on this bullshit. All right. So that's where you get this type of, these type of atrocities happening. All right. So what we want to continue on now. So basically, I just wanted to go into that part so you could see the background of, what was going on. Like the indigenous people here, unfortunately, were unprepared when it came to their military defense and national camaraderie with other indigenous tribes. It wasn't a empire unit like it was supposed to be. And the people were caught off guard, and, a lot of people suffered and lost their lives, their livelihood, etc. And a lot of the chiefs and leaders at this time, a lot of them were buck dancing and selling out to these Spaniard Crusaders. Not all of them were, but you had a lot of them that were. All right. So let's continue. Among the persons who were being held for shipment to Spain was Caonabo, the principal chief of Maguana. So Caonabo, he's the principal chief of Maguana, and Maguana ultimately is that entire island, their empire there. Okay. And what was happening is that these Spaniard Crusaders were kidnapping indigenous Americans and then sending them back to Spain. Okay. Let's read about Caonabo. He was accused by Chief Guacanagari of the destruction of La Navidad. Caonabo was a very powerful and respected chief and was considered the Spaniards' most formidable enemy. So Caonabo is another American leader, another American warrior that they ain't gonna tell you about. Caonabo, all right, from the island of Maguana. It says that he was angry that visitors had invaded the island and built a fort in his dominion without his consent. He was also infuriated that the Spaniards had demanded a tribute from his people. And even more, he was incensed of the cruel and savage behavior of the colonizers, and he wanted them off of his island. Caonabo, along with other principal chiefs of the island, devised a plan to rid of the Spaniards from Hispaniola or Maguana. When the Spaniards received word of the plot through Guacanagari, which was a snitch indigenous American, they concocted a plan to capture Caonabo. The Spaniards were hell-bent at bringing Chief Caonabo to justice for the destruction at La Navidad. So in 1492, when Columbus first got to the island, they built a settlement called La Navidad, and Caonabo said, no, I'm not going for that. And him and his men went and destroyed it. So then you had another snitch, a rat, named Guacanagari, who's from America, an indigenous American, who was a rat. And he was, selling out and basically giving information to Columbus and the Spanish conquistadors. So once again, the same way how all the Moorish Europeans weren't coming here acting like crusaders and acting evil. Some of them were actually coming and trying to work with the people. It's also the same way that all indigenous American chiefs and leaders weren't strong and had a powerful, army and military, had a strong might, had a backbone, and were willing to die for their people and die for their land. Chief Caonabo was willing to die for his people and his land. But this snitch named Guacanagari was a rat, and he wasn't. And we want to remember his name for being a rat. Guacanagari. He was a rat. So it says Guacanagari was the first chief of the island to ally with Columbus and to become a compliant of Columbus's demands. When his villages were destroyed along with La Navidad, Columbus promised him protection from Caonabo for his loyalty. Caonabo allegedly destroyed the villages because the Spaniards, in Columbus's absence, committed numerous crimes against the native people, and he allegedly destroyed Guacanagari's village in response to his loyalty to the strangers. So let's get the indigenous name. So modern day, what they was calling Hispaniola, the main part of it was called Maguana, Maguana. Another part of it was called Magua, Magua. Another part was called Marian, Marien. Another part of it was called Higuey, Higuey. And another part was called Xaragua, Xaragua. So these may be the indigenous American names. So when I called out Anacaona, the Empress of Xaragua, now you all know what I'm talking about. Modern day, what they call, the islands of Haiti, Cuba, etc. Dominican Republic, all that. So it says that the Spaniards arranged a fake meeting with Caonabo and his villagers. So remember, Caonabo, he's coming up with a plot to go against these Spaniards. But this rat named Guacanagari, he told Christopher Columbus. So now the Spaniards are coming up with a plot to try to capture Caonabo. It says the Spaniards arranged a fake meeting with Caonabo and his villagers. He was presented with numerous gifts, among them some shiny handcuffs. Caonabo was fascinated with shiny objects, so he was immediately drawn to them. The Spaniards told him he should try them on, and Caonabo obliged. Once the handcuffs were secure, the Spaniards took custody of him and carried him back to their ships, where he was held captive until the ship sailed back to Spain. He, however, never made it to Spain. He died along the way. So unfortunately, they finessed the brother. They backdoored him, and he died. It says, with Caonabo now out of his way and Guacanagari under Columbus's thumb, Columbus was well on his way to regulating the entire island. Guarionex has now even submitted to the Spaniards, even offering his daughter to Columbus's brother. The chief who now stood the most in his way was Behiquio, chief of the most populous area of the island Xaragua, and his sister Anacaona, wife of Caonabo, who appeared to share the equal responsibilities as the chief of Xaragua. So Anacaona is the sister of Chief Behechio, Behiquio, which is that the main island Xaragua. So he's the chief of it. His sister is Anacaona, and Anacaona is the wife of Caonabo, the chief who basically got finessed and they caught him. So now her husband has gotten caught, and her brother is now the next one that Columbus is looking at as his top op. So it says that upon Columbus's initial visit to Xaragua, he was able to successfully negotiate a tribute from that section of the island. It says that Behiquio was actually surprised and relieved of Columbus's actions. He believed Columbus was going to capture him because of his alliance and personal relationship with Caonabo. Behiquio, who later died of natural causes, and Anacaona, who was described as one of the most beautiful women on the island, and who took over as primary chief, remained loyal to Columbus for years. Be that as it may, by the early 1500s, because of the deplorable conditions that the people of the island had to endure, it was believed by the Spaniards that Anacaona and the people of Xaragua were planning to conspire against them. So they caught wind that Anacaona is going to conspire against them because her people were suffering. All right, let's kind of move forward a little bit. So basically, Anacaona and her people, they came up with a plot, a scheme. I'm going to kind of fast forward through it. So basically what happened is some of her chiefs were caught, and they ended up telling that she was planning a revolt to go against the Spaniards. So we'll start there. It says the chiefs were bound and tortured until the Spaniards received a confession from the chiefs that Anacaona was plotting against them. Anacaona was captured and taken away while the house where the chiefs were bound was set on fire, and all the chiefs, which is said to have been more than 80, perished in the flames. The inhabitants of Xaragua were then pursued by the horsemen, trampling them under the hooves of the horses and stabbing them with their lances, swords, and spears of the Spaniards. No mercy was shown to age or sex. It was a savage and indiscriminate butchery. Several who escaped from the massacre fled into their canoes. They were pursued and taken and condemned to slavery. Anacaona was taken in chains to Santo Domingo, or Saint Domingo, where a mock trial was given, and she was found guilty by the testimonies that were coerced and tortured from her chiefs. She was then hung in front of her survivors. So the woman you see on the screen, Anacaona, she tried to basically get all her chiefs together, get the military together, and fight against the Spaniards to help her people. But some of her people were caught, they were tortured, and they ended up telling on her. And then basically, they locked them all in a building, they burned them down. They captured Anacaona, they put her in a mock trial, and then they hung her in front of all her people. All right. So she is a American warrior that we want to memorialize and keep her name strong. Anacaona, Anacaona. Let's continue. Her memory is still celebrated today, 500 years or 500 centuries after her hanging. She is remembered not only as leader of her people, she is known for the ballads, songs, and poetry she created. An 18th century poet, Alfred Lord Tennyson, even wrote a poem about her, which he never published, giving various unconvincing reasons, but perhaps providing the real reason in an underguarded comment describing, quote, that black bitch Anacaona and her cocoa shadowed coves of niggers. I can't have her strolling about in the land in this way. It is neither good for her reputation nor mine, end quote. Apparently, writing a positive poem about a black person in the 1800s was taboo. But even more than that, it would reveal that the people of the island were of a Negroid stock. top. So I'm gonna reread this. So you had an more than likely a Caucasian poet in the 1700s named Alfred Lord Tennyson. And in his poem, he described Anacaona as, quote, that black bitch Anacaona and her cocoa shadowed coves of niggers. I cannot have her strolling about the land in this way. It is neither good for her reputation nor mine. So right here, they're describing Anacaona as a, quote, black bitch. And they're saying that she was accompanied with cocoa shadowed coves of nigger. Now, I remember as a child, there was a cereal called Cocoa Puffs. All right. They were these little brown balls. And Cocoa Puffs are actually the same complexion or color as so-called black people. So it looks like Anacaona not only was described as a so-called black woman, but the people that were with her were described as being cocoa colored, and they called them niggers. So they called Anacaona a black bitch, and they called the people with her niggers. Now, let me ask you all this. Who do they call today a quote unquote black bitch and niggers? The so-called black woman and the men and children, male children associated with them, right? So they're calling Anacaona a nigger. Okay. They're calling Anacaona a nigger. So they're letting us know what her ethnicity is. If they were calling her a nigger, that means that she was an American woman of copper colored descent. Could she have been Shemitic Israelite, full blooded? Maybe. Could she have been Shemitic Israelite, Canaanite admixture? Maybe. From our people just doing ancient travels? Possibly. But nevertheless, she was a so-called black woman and she was an American. All right. So we just learned, about another historical figure, Anacaona, Empress of Xaragua. Somebody we could salute, look like she stood up and, and held shit down. You know what I'm saying? And she went out fighting. So, she all right with me. But y'all stay tuned. I'm out.